Welcome back to part 3 of this tutorial series. As a quick recap, in part 2 we created this nice parallaxed animation by starting in Photoshop and segmenting and healing our 2D image in order to give us our foreground, midground, and background layers to then animate. So in this part 3 here, we're going to look at how we can basically achieve the same thing, but speed the process up a little by using our depth scanner plugin. So the first thing I want to show you is I'm just going to use this same lake image and show you how we can at least start that process using that image that we've just worked with. So to start doing that, I'm going to go ahead and create a new composition. We can call this scanner test maybe, and then we'll leave it at 30 seconds. That'll be fine. 1920 by 1080 is great, and I'm gonna hit OK. So now let's get our lake image in here. So I'm gonna grab our lake 1 image, drop it in sources, and we can throw that in this new composition. So let's go ahead and scale it to fit. So we'll go somewhere right in here. Maybe we'll go 71.5, and that looks good. Okay, so we've got our image in, we've scaled it to fit our composition. Now let's actually get our depth scanner plugin applied. So if we select our Lake 1 layer, and then we come over here to effects and presets, we can just type in depth scanner, and as long as you have it installed and ready to go, it'll be right here for you. So we can either click and drag this onto our layer, or we can, since we have our layer selected, we can just double click it, and there we go. Now it's applied. So in just a moment here, we're going to see the actual depth map of this image get generated. And there we go. So what this is doing is it's taking information from our 2D image and calculating based on saturation and other things to see what is closest to us in that image and also what is furthest away. So if we turn this off, we can see our normal image, we can see the desaturated mountain there, the sky in the back, and then the saturated foreground up here. And it is using all that information to give us a grayscale depiction of the depth in this image. So as we're getting started, I'm just going to run through some of the parameters that we have control over here. So we can choose our model. Right now it's on this anything V2 small. We can click through a couple, give it a minute to re-render this for us. So now we're seeing a little more of that background in there. Maybe we could try an anything large, and then we start to lose some of the trees and some of the background. So maybe we'll start, just going to click through a few here. We can try this large indoor. We can see if this will work for us. So we're seeing this stark white right here because this is super prominent and very close to our imagined camera, right? And then things start to get darker and darker as they fade into the background. So this is our depth map. And this is one feature of depth scanner, but you can also come over here to mode and change it from depth map to slicing. And for creating our parallax, we're going to actually want to work in the slicing mode. So if we click into that mode, we see that we have two parameters here. We have our minimum percentage and our maximum percentage. So if we just play around with those a little bit, we can start to see that if we slide our minimum up, it's starting to take our foreground out, and it removes everything from starting with what's closest to the camera, moving to what's furthest away. And that's all being done based on that depth map that we just saw. Same with if we see the maximum, that's talking about the maximum distance that we can still see. If we start to slide that down, we can start to see our background get faded out. And if we turn on our transparency grid, we can see that it's actually just getting rid of that part of the image and turning it transparent for us. So So I'm going to toggle that back off. And this is working decently well, but we're losing a little bit of that foliage, and I think that's because of the model that we're working with. So I'm going to set this back to 100. I'm going to click back onto depth map, and I'm going to click through a couple more models. Maybe we'll try this anything V2 small. I think that's going to work well to segment out our foreground. So let's go back to slicing, and let's just take our maximum down. We can see it sliding from background to foreground, and right in here we're getting something pretty good and something that's pretty close to what we actually achieved in Photoshop. Now we've gotten rid of this tree here, but it doesn't really matter in the long run. We don't really have to have that tree there unless it's some important feature of our animation. But we can see with just a few clicks, we've already achieved what took us a decent amount of time in Photoshop to actually cut out and heal. So this is pretty good. This is pretty good. And if we take a look here, we still have the same issue that we had in Photoshop. It's not really any worse than what we got out of Photoshop, but since we're in After Effects already, we can go ahead and try and key some of this blue out. So I'm going to twirl this up, get that out of our way, and I'm going to click back onto our Lake 1 layer, go back to Effects and Presets, and I'm just going to search for key. And the effect we're looking for here is just the linear color key. So I'm going to apply that to our layer. And if we click on our little eyedropper tool, we can select what color we want to get rid of. So I'm going to find just a nice blue. And right there with one click, we see a lot of that get taken care of. And we can play with our matching softness. Okay, we can play with our matching tolerance until we get something that looks like what we want. And really, I think somewhere right in here is pretty good for us. So just like that, we already have essentially what we created in Photoshop just by applying a couple of effects and using the slicing features of our depth scanner plugin. So then if we want to start to animate this, actually first, let's talk about these branches. We still have these branches that we got rid of last time. So one way we can go about getting rid of them here is just by masking them out of the image. And it's important that we bring this up now because when you have depth scanner applied to a layer, it doesn't actually work very well with masks. And we can take a look at that. Hopefully this is a feature that they will update and improve with time, and perhaps in the 2025 version they've already done this. I'm not sure. But for our purposes right now, all we need to know is that depth scanner doesn't really love masks. So if we zoom out here with our layer selected, we can grab our rectangle tool and we can try and mask out all of those branches. And as we do that, we see nothing really happened. We can invert it, uninvert it, nothing's really going away. So it's not working. So we'll get rid of that. Zoom back in here. And if we do want to mask this, all we have to do is we can go ahead and pre-compose this layer. And we're going to want to move all attributes into the new composition. So we'll select that, we'll hit OK. And now what we have is this Lake 1 composition that we can open up if we want. And within there, we have our Lake 1 layer with all of its effects that we can manipulate in here. But in our actual scanner test composition, all we have is this Lake 1 Comp 1. And that's good because now that this is its own composition, we can actually mask out all of these things that we don't want. So I'm just going to select all of those branches with my mask, and then I'm going to come down here and invert it. So now we've gotten rid of those branches, and if we want to start to animate this, we can come up here, scale it up a little bit, and we can move it over, and we'll drop a keyframe there. We can come out to our 15-second mark, move it over this way, drop our keyframe there, and just like that, we have the beginnings of our parallaxed animation. Now we're seeing this yellow cross, and that's because that's the watermark of the free version. So if you're wanting to actually export this to use it in a show or anything like that, obviously you're going to want the paid version so that you don't have this watermark. But just for us to learn about this tool, the watermark's not really in our way. And just like that, with a few simple clicks, we've achieved the first step of our parallax using the Depth Scanner plugin. Now that we've seen how we can start that same process using the same image we used in Photoshop, let's actually start working on something that can be a finished product for us. So I've chosen my subject as a piece of art that I've made, so I need a scene that fits this piece of art, right? And we're gonna run through that same process of segmentation and then animation, but using this plugin. And to do that, we're gonna need to start by finding some images. So once again here, I've done this in Firefly, if I can find my tab. So I've generated 3 images for this process. One was just a forest. I said comic book style image of a clearing in a spooky forest, lit by the glow of a campfire. Forest shows signs of a recent battle. And I've chosen this image here for that one, and that's going to end up being our foreground for this process. Then we need a midground, so I wanted some mountains in the background. So I just looked for a comic book style of image with a valley surrounded by mountains at sunset. And I found some good ones here. I ended up downloading this one after upscaling it. And then my actual background, I want to just be the sunset that I can put behind these mountains. So I just put in that prompt there and ended up upscaling and downloading this one to use. So now that we've got some images to work with, let's go ahead and throw them in After Effects. So we'll start by creating a new composition. We can call this one, I'm calling this project Hero, so I'll call it Hero-Segment. Make it 30 seconds, 1920 by 1080 like normal, and we'll hit OK, and we have our new composition. So now let's get all those new images into our sources folder. So for me, that's going to be my forest 2, my sunset 3, and my valley 1. So I'm going to drag those in there, and I'm going to go ahead and drag them all into our composition. So we have our forest on top, which is good, then our sunset, so I'm going to drag that down to the bottom, so everything's already layered correctly. And let's start, as always, by scaling these to fit the composition. So since they're all from Firefly, they were all upscaled, they're all the same size, so I'm going to just shift-click down here to select all of them. I'm going to hit S to open up the scale parameter, and I'm going to scale down until it seems to fit, and it looks like we're going to want to be at 71.5 once again. And that's pretty good. So there we go. We've got everything scaled to fit. We're ready to get to work. So let's start with our foreground, with our forest image here. It's got this nice fire lighting, it's got these prominent foreground trees, and then a much more desaturated background, and that's going to work in our favor here. So if we solo that layer, now we're not going to see any of these behind it. We can grab with our layer selected, our Depth Scanner plugin, and apply it to that layer. And there's our depth map. So once again, if we want to mess around with some of these models, we can. See, now we're getting much more of the background trees. But since we're wanting to just grab these foreground trees, we actually don't need to see a ton of that background. So I'm going to go back to this anything v2 small, and I think that's going to work pretty well for us. So just like we did last time, we're going to change our mode from depth map to slicing. And we don't want to see as far back in the image as we do right now. So the way we're going to make that happen is we're going to take our maximum percentage and we're going to start to decrease it. And as we do that, we can see it moving from background to foreground once again and starting to get rid of things. So, and this is where we do have some room to be creative, right? We can decide what trees we want to keep. Like sometimes we're losing part of this tree, but now it looks like a cool stump, so maybe we actually like that. Or we could come all the way over here, just leave that. So I think with this image in particular, we could go with that fire is looking a little strange there. So we could either leave that in or we could get rid of it. I think I'm okay with the fire there. So I'm going to come right out here. And I think that's going to work. I think this is a nice area to put our subject in. We still have a little flame for interest. That line's a little hard, but it's not the end of the world, right? And if we really wanted to, like we saw, we could get rid of it and just leave ourselves with this. But I actually like this lighting. It centers focus on our subject. So this is pretty good for us. So now we have transparency behind our image. And since we're talking about the subject, let's go ahead and throw it in. So I'm going to find my hero drawing PNG. I'm going to layer that in on top of everything else. And we can go ahead and start scaling this guy into place, putting his feet on the ground. And that's pretty good. He doesn't match the lighting or anything yet, but that's something we can worry about later. For right now, I'm going to unsolo everything. And we can see right off the bat that we have isolated our foreground, and now we can layer in our valley behind it. Now that we're starting to see these pieces come together, I can see more kind of artifacting and things that I'm not loving going on over here. So I'm going to go ahead and just readjust our maximum percentage to somewhere around 70, and that's pretty good. So then we can reposition our hero drawing, get his feet on the ground. And there we go. We've gotten rid of some of those floating branches, some of the artifacting, and now we have this nice prominent foreground that appears to be kind of dropping off into the distance, leading into this valley that's going to serve as our midground. So let's take a look at that next. For our midground here, what we're going to want to do is basically just get rid of the sky and keep everything below that mountain ridge line. So let's go ahead and solo that layer, our midground layer. Mine's called Valley 1. I'm going to select it, and I'm going to go ahead and apply our depth scanner. So the model here, I think depth anything small is going to work pretty well for us. If we change to slicing mode, we can drag our maximum down because we're trying to not see quite as far. And as we do that, we start to lose a lot of stuff pretty quickly. But if we just make really minor adjustments, come down 1%, maybe we could even try 99.5. I think I like 99 more. So there, with our transparency grid on, we see we're left with just the mountains, and we've taken the sky out of the picture, just like that. So if we unsolo here, we have our top 3 layers looking just like they should, and now we just need to throw a sky in the mix. So to do that, all we have to do is turn our layer on. This one's easy, right? We don't actually need to remove anything from it. We can try and position it in a way that feels nice Maybe we want to see a little bit of those mountains peeking up, or maybe we just want that sun just barely peeking up over the mountains. And that's pretty good. It actually matches the lighting decently well. That's pretty nice. Now that we have each of our layers isolated from one another just like we want, we can move on to the next steps of this process, which are going to be animating these layers and then doing a little bit of color correction just to make everything feel like it fits and like it really lives within this scene. So we'll start by animating our foreground. Just like last time, if we want to move it side to side, we need to first scale it up so that we don't lose the image on the sides. Now we don't need a ton of movement here, so I'm going to just scale it up a little bit, maybe move it up just a hair, somewhere right in there. That's probably pretty good. Now that we've changed the scale of this layer, we want to make sure that our subject, whatever it may be, still feels like it fits on that layer. So maybe we need to scale that up just a little bit. Maybe that's pretty nice there. I like that 15% for this. So that fits. And we know that as we move our foreground across the screen, we want our subject to stay grounded, stay rooted in the same spot. So an easy way of doing that is to parent the two layers together. So if you come to your subject layer and click on this drop down of parent and link drop down, go ahead and select whatever your foreground layer is in that drop down menu. And now whenever you move your foreground, your subject is going to move right along with it. So that's great. That makes things easy for us. We can forget about animating our subject. So let's go ahead and get some movement on this foreground. Maybe this time we'll start over on the left and we'll move it left to right. So like I said, we don't need a ton of movement here. I'm just going to come right out there, do that, drop a keyframe, come out to our 15-second mark, and we'll just shift it just about that much there. Something like that. And let's look at the speed on that. That's not too bad. I like that. Okay, so we're going to work with that for now. So the next thing we want to do is actually animate our background. So our sunset layer. So we're going to start the same way. We're going to scale it up just a little bit. And we want to make sure that we're moving it the opposite direction of our foreground once again. So our foreground is moving left to right. So our background will move right to left. So let's make that happen. Let's go ahead and move it out to the right side here. Let's see how that looks in the composition. It's pretty nice. So we can drop a keyframe there. Come out to 15 seconds here. And I'm going to unsolo so that we can see how this lines up. Maybe we'll bring it somewhere right in there. The sun peeking over his shoulder. That's kind of nice. So let's take a look at what we've got. The speed actually feels pretty good, I think. Right? So I'm happy with this movement. I'm happy with the speed of it, happy with the duration. So we're in a good spot. Our animation really is done as far as animating goes. So our next step is going to be trying to make everything fit a little more cohesively, visually speaking. In order to make everything look nice and cohesive, we first need to think about which part of this image or which layer we have we want to match to, right? So I really like the lighting of our foreground. I think it's nice. I think it has that warm glow, feels a little dark, just like I want. So I don't want to modify this one. I like this one as it is, and I want to modify the rest of these layers to look a little more like this. So maybe I'll start with the midground. We're seeing a lot of that midground layer, so let's see if we can get that to look a little more cohesive with this. So I'm going to turn off our subject, and just to get him out of the way so I can see more of this, now I'm going to click onto the midground layer. I'm going to twirl this depth scanner up just so we don't get distracted there. And we can start doing some color correction on this layer here. So if we look at our brightness and contrast, if you just type in bright, you should see color correction, brightness and contrast, excuse me. And we can go ahead and apply that effect to our layer. This gives us two parameters, so we can boost or subtract brightness from the image, and then we can boost or subtract the amount of contrast that we're seeing. So I'm liking this a little bit darker, a little bit higher contrast. It starts to fit in that kind of dark, fiery glow world of this foreground here. So that's getting pretty close. I'm actually really happy with that. But if we're not fully satisfied and we want to do a little more to it, we could also look at our hue and saturation. So if you type in hue, you should see hue and saturation. You can apply that. And you can see if maybe you could shift more red. You can get a little crazy with it, you know. But I might like a little more red shift here. So something like that maybe, especially if we can get the background to match. So let's see, if we turn that off, that's what we started with. So it's a subtle change, but I think it might be kind of nice. Once again, if we can get the background to match. So let's look at that next. We're happy with our midground right now. Let's take a look at our background, and let's start the same way. Let's apply a brightness and contrast. We can see if maybe we boost the contrast, get a little darker, maybe even more contrast, go about 40. We could get really bright, get really dark. I want it to feel artistic, but I still want it to feel natural, right? So we'll mess around with this a little bit until we find something that we're really liking. Maybe I'll go back to 40 here, lessen that just a little bit, and 70. I think that's pretty nice. So then if we still want to mess with it, we can do our same hue and saturation, apply that, and see if maybe we can find a color that feels nice for us. So again, we can get a little more red. And then that helps it to really fit that midground, the back part of that midground that gets really red. This gives us a nice fit there. So everything's starting to feel a little more cohesive. And now that I've done that, I'm starting to see that our foreground could actually benefit from a bit of color correction as well. I think we could get a little more red. So let's just do the same process. Let's play with our brightness and contrast. Maybe we can go a little darker, a little more contrast in there. Makes it feel a little more spooky, a little more focused, right? So maybe we'll go -30 and 35. That's pretty nice. And then maybe we'll give it a bit of red shift on the hue. Just a little bit. I think right there is pretty good. Maybe we could even go one more. Let's try a 5. Oops. Went in the wrong direction. And this is starting to feel really nice. Okay, I like that. Everything's feeling cohesive. So our last step here is to make our subject fit in, because right now he's sticking out like a sore thumb. And this is going to be the same exact process that we just looked at. So once again, we'll get our brightness and contrast. And I'm going to go ahead and throw in our hue and saturation as well. But we'll still start with brightness and contrast. So maybe we want a little more contrast there. We want him a little darker because it's getting to be sunset. There's not a ton of light out. And then we definitely want to shift his coloring to match. He needs to be lit by some more red light. He's looking really just kind of dull without it. So this is getting us pretty close to where we want to be. So maybe we'll go somewhere in there. Maybe we'll saturate it a little more. Something like that. Now he's really starting to feel like he's actually part of the scene, right? So we'll go back and forth with this saturation and the hue until we find something that feels natural, and I think that's right about there. So now everything looks like it's actually part of the same picture because we've color corrected it. We already have our animation in place. So once again, I'm going to just find our keyframe. I'm going to hit N. I'm going to hit Command-Shift-X. So now we've trimmed our composition to the length of our animation. And we'll watch it and make sure that we're happy with the whole thing. I think the speed is nice. I think the duration is pretty nice. I think the color correction looks nice. So I think we're in good shape. So that was the same process that we went through in Photoshop, except basically taking all the work we did in Photoshop and letting Depth Scanner handle all of that for us. So we've achieved the same type of animation, but just with a lot less work, and it took a lot less time. Now, there are some things that might merit using the Photoshop techniques. For example, if you really wanted to get specific about which trees and which branches you wanted to leave in, at that point you'd want to go cut things out in Photoshop and put them in here. But again, just for the purposes of learning about this tool, this was quick and easy, and we got a pretty nice looking result out of it. So in our next segment, we're going to look at using the same plugin, Depth Scanner, to actually take an image like this, a 2D image, and rotate it a little bit as though the camera is rotating around our subject. So when we pick back up in part 4, that's what we'll learn.